I would like to welcome everyone to the official start of the 2014 League of American Bicyclists Club and Advocacy Organization Insurance Package. My guest tonight for this webinar is Marla Peters. She's Senior Vice President in charge of special programs for American Specialty Insurance. They've been working with us for more than a decade, providing insurance and high-quality service to our clubs. It is almost the start of the new insurance year. It starts on February the 1st, and everyone needs to get renewed. So she's going to tell us all about the new package. I am going to turn the screen over to Marla. And Marla, how about you take it away?
Okay, are you able to see what's on my screen?
I see it.
Okay, excellent. I also have with me Renee Watterson this evening, who many of you may know and may have talked to on the phone. We should also mention that we are adding a new member to our team, Chris Whitted, who will probably be talking to a lot of you as you are enrolling. And if you have coverage questions, Chris is going to be the point person, but still working closely with Renee in our customer services department. Just a little bit of background. Our company has had the privilege of working with the League for many years. We appreciate your business and we appreciate the opportunity to continue to serve in that capacity. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, we are located in Roanoke, Indiana, and we have been in business since 1989. We exclusively focus on sports and entertainment, risk management, and insurance services. So everything we do has to do with people participating in competitive and recreational sports. And so very fortunate to have the expertise to be able to put together a customized program for the League that really provides the coverages you need as recreational bicycle organizations. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to provide that service to you. We have about 11 individuals in our office who work with the League in some form or another, but myself and Renee and Chris are going to be the people that you would work with. We currently insure around 600 participating clubs, so a majority of the League's membership. And we are going to be showing you today some information about our online enrollment system, which we've kind of tweaked and tried to improve over the years so that it's efficient, fast, and easy for you all to use. We don't want to make insurance any more difficult or unpleasant than some people may already find it. Hopefully want it to be something that you value and that works well for you. So just by way of background, I wanted to provide that information. In terms of who can join the League's insurance program.
Excuse me, Marla?
Yes.
I am going to try to, part of your screen is not showing correctly, so I'm just going to, you can keep, oh, there it is. What did you do?
Okay. That was, okay. Sorry, I had my bar open so I could see potential questions, but I know you'll tell me if there's questions, so I don't need to see that.
I will do that. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate it. So in terms of who can join the program, it is exclusively available to members of the League of American Bicyclists. It's a program that the League makes available to you, and they spend quite a bit of time and energy making sure that we are up to speed on current developments in your industry, and that we make sure that our insurance coverages and program keep up with all of the changes and the environment that you are all faced with in the world of bicycling. You do not have to be an incorporated organization or have tax-exempt status, but you do have to be a nonprofit membership-based entity. One clarification we like to make so that we don't have anyone join and find out later this isn't really the right fit for you or try to join is that we are not a provider of coverage for mountain biking organizations. If you are primarily a recreational bicycling organization, but you have some mountain biking, that is okay. But if you are specifically a mountain biking organization, there would be other insurance programs out there that we would want to direct you to that would be a better fit for your organization. Now, one of the things that we will be asking when you go through the enrollment process is whether you are signing up as a bicycle club or an advocacy organization. And we define those in a certain way relative to the insurance program. It might be distinct from or different from how you normally use those terms, but just so you know how it works within the context of this insurance program, the bicycle clubs and advocacy organizations receive the same insurance coverage at the end of the day, but you pay for it differently. So it is important to know what's the best way for you to sign up when you get into the online enrollment system. The advocacy organizations pay a flat premium to join the program. It's not impacted by your membership size. But the key here is that in order to qualify for that and to be considered an advocacy organization, you must have no more than 12 club rides annually. So in other words, rides that are primarily organized for your members and where you aren't charging a fee. And those have to have an average of 50 or fewer riders. If you fall outside of that and you're an organization that has a larger number of regular club rides, then you would sign up as a bicycle club when you go into the enrollment system. And bicycle clubs pay a membership-based premium to join the program, and it's subject to a minimum premium, which we will talk about later. There are some different benefits and optional coverages we're going to talk about, and those premiums are calculated the same for bicycle clubs and advocacy organizations. For example, the special event rates that come into play when you have a bicycle ride where you are charging a fee to participate, those rates apply the same for both types of organizations. So now we are going to talk a little bit about what the program is from an insurance standpoint, what the coverages are. To those of you who have participated for many years, some of this will probably be things you've heard before, but hopefully you take something away from it each time. And when you don't work with insurance all year long, I know sometimes you may have forgotten some of what we talked about, so hopefully it's a good refresher. The basic coverages that you receive automatically when you enroll in the program are general liability and participant accident. We're going to talk more about what those are and what the limits are. There are also some optional coverages that your club may want to purchase separately. Those are additional, what we call excess liability limits, directors and officers liability coverage, and something we call non-owned and hired auto liability coverage, which, again, I'll talk about each of those more specifically later. This program does not provide or have an avenue to provide workers' compensation coverage, property for a building you may own or for equipment that you own, or for any owned automobiles that you own. If you do have any need for those types of coverages, we would recommend that you go through a local insurance agent who's going to be able to focus specifically on your needs and circumstances in those areas. So to move into the first coverage, and probably the one that most people are most eager to have, and the reason that you are looking for coverage through this program, is general liability insurance. This is the coverage that applies if your club or a volunteer in your club or one of your directors or even an individual member is named in a lawsuit. Most often those claims are going to arise from somebody being injured. That's the most frequent type of claim that we see in the league, and really that we would expect based on what you do. There are a couple other coverages, and I'll talk about those as well. But to give you some examples of bodily injury claims that we see in the league program, there are about 7 claims per year, which is, if you're thinking about the fact that we insure about 600 clubs, it's a small number of claims, which is good. The challenge is that some of these claims can be quite large and cost quite a bit to defend the club relative to the claim. We have had, in the last 7 years, 2 claims that have exceeded $400,000, both which involved a cyclist who struck a pedestrian while on a trail that was intended for both pedestrians and bicyclists. We've all had claims and lawsuits arising from a participant who fell due to road conditions, maybe hitting a seam in a road or gravel, that type of scenario. And also we have had examples of cyclists being struck by a vehicle. So I would say none of those are probably surprising based on what you all know you do as cyclists, that those are unfortunately some of the hazards that can come into play. And the reason you want to have insurance in the event somebody brings a lawsuit as a result of one of those circumstances. There's also property damage liability, and that is liability for you or a club member damaging somebody else's property accidentally. The examples we've had have primarily surrounded cyclists who maybe hit somebody's vehicle and damaged the actual vehicle. And then there's also sports equipment liability coverage, which covers, again, it doesn't cover the members' bicycles when they are using their bicycles, but if your club has taken possession, like in a bike valet situation or a bike corral, of other people's bicycles and something happens to one of them, then that coverage will come into play at that time. In terms of who is covered under the general liability, so in terms, who is going to be covered if a lawsuit names them or names the organization, it covers the club itself or your advocacy organization if you have enrolled and paid the appropriate premium. It covers the members of the club, volunteers of the club, and the directors, officers, and employees of the insured clubs. It also, for covered rides specifically, will cover first-time invited guests. So if somebody is coming to check out your club and see if they want to become a member and they participate on a ride, they are covered for general liability for that first ride that they participate on. After that, we want to, and we know you want to, encourage them to become members. In terms of the activities for which the people I just talked about are covered, we break it down into a few different areas. The first one is what we refer to as club rides, and these are just your regular rides that you organize throughout the year for your members, and I know sometimes people show up who aren't members, but these are your regular rides where you're not charging a fee, you're going out and you're having a great time on a ride together. They need to be conducted and supervised by the club. And for advocacy organizations, if you indicate that you do have the 12 or fewer rides we talked about at the beginning, then you also would be covered for those as well. There is an option for advocacy organizations when they enroll to say they don't do any club rides, and there is a lower premium associated with that. But keep in mind that if you say that at the beginning and then you have a club ride and we haven't been charged for it and don't know about it, that wouldn't be covered. So you want to make sure to answer that the way you anticipate what's going to happen throughout the year if you're an advocacy organization. And if something changes, just give us a call and we can talk through your scenario and decide what's the best course to make sure we get that covered for you. We also provide coverage for what we call special events under the Leagues program. And these are the rides you have where a lot of times you're opening them up to the public, you're promoting them within the community, and where you charge a participation fee. And these events have to be actually reported by name to American Specialty prior to the event, and then you pay the appropriate premium for that following the event. We're able to charge in that way because the League has such a great track record of your membership following through and paying the premium after the fact. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to extend that, which is pretty uncommon, pay after the event in the insurance industry. And also, in addition to that, the general liability policy covers bicycle-related activities, which would include things like your club meetings, your fundraisers, time trials where you aren't having people race against each other. They're basically just trying to do their own personal best, racing against the clock. Bicycle education courses, which we'll talk about that later. There's a separate fee that applies, so we just need you to make sure you tell us if you're doing those or not. Trail maintenance, promoting safe routes to school programs, and bike refurbishment is an optional coverage that you can purchase for general liability, and that's where you are maybe taking in bikes and cleaning them up, doing some quick repairs, and maybe selling them or even giving them away within your community. Different from a commercial bike repair shop, which wouldn't be something that's covered under this program. So if you're a commercial bike repair shop where people bring their bike to you, they drop them off, you fix them, and they pay for it, that is not something that this program would cover. So it wouldn't be the right fit for you if you do that. The limits on the general liability policy are $1 million for each occurrence. So if you have an accident that involves 3 different people, that's still considered one occurrence, so that $1 million limit applies. But it is notable that the defense costs are not part of that limit. So the defense costs being the funds that are available to pay for an attorney to defend you, which we will appoint as part of the claims management process to represent you, those costs are not part of that limit. And a lot of times there are a large number of defense costs involved, and actually no judgment is made against the club at the end of the day. So those defense costs being separate from the limit is a good thing. You also have the ability to buy an additional $1 million of coverage, and 11 clubs currently take advantage of that. Sometimes it's needed because you need to have that extra coverage in order to get access to a certain municipal venue, or an area that you're trying to use for one of your rides in the city requires a $2 million limit. And if you do need that, that is available, and it's quite affordable through the LEAKS program. There's a $3 million general aggregate, which means that's the most that could be paid for all of your claims during the course of 1 year. We have never had a situation that came anywhere near that with one individual club. That's not to say that couldn't ever happen, but that is the aggregate that applies. And then I mentioned earlier that sports equipment liability coverage. For example, if you have the bike corral or you're doing a bike valet program, that has a $5,000 limit and a $500 per claim deductible. A couple items that are always of interest and are really important relative to general liability. We spend some time each year talking about waivers. From my experience, the leagues, clubs do a fantastic job of securing waivers from riders. And the reason that's a good thing is because ultimately, at the end of the day, it protects you. When a lawsuit comes in, it varies by jurisdiction in terms of the value, but it never hurts to have a waiver. And when we have had lawsuits arise, I would say almost 100% of the time the clubs have been able to produce the waiver signed by either the member or the person who participated on a special event. And we have had cases where we've had claims actually be dismissed by the courts because the waiver was signed saying that the person had agreed not to bring a lawsuit against the club. So it can end up saving you a lot of time and money in the end. And so it's an important step to take. I know it's an administrative nightmare sometimes. A lot of clubs I know are moving more towards the electronic waiver, and so we get some questions about that. We have had some cases now where the electronic waiver has been upheld as admissible in the defense process, which is great. We recommend that if you are going to go down that path, you try to have the electronic signature be tied to a financial transaction, because that helps us prove that, in fact, the person who got hurt and who is now suing you is, in fact, the same person that signed the waiver. By having that financial transaction tied to it helps create that link. The other thing we now know is that you will need to be able to produce and show the technology behind the securing of the signature that shows what language was seen by the person when they signed the waiver, and it shows the technology progression that took them through the process to get to that signature. So if you're working with a third-party vendor, it's a good idea to ask them. I think I just posed the question. Now, if this comes into play in court and we need to produce it, you know, have you ever had a situation where you've had to do that? How has it worked? Or if you haven't, you know, how are you set up to be able to support us in showing that our waiver was valid? Some other things to mention, I talked already about this not being a good fit for commercial bike or repair shops. It also does not cover bicycle racing. It does not cover for-profit tours. It does not cover supervising a walking, biking school bus. I mentioned earlier that it does cover safe routes to school programs, promoting them, teaching people how to do them, encouraging them in the community. Where there's a line of distinction is if you are actually providing volunteers to walk children, or even in a bike situation, to and from school. So that's where that distinction is made. But our understanding is the coverage that's in place for the Safe Routes to School type programs really matches up for the most part with what you all are doing in terms of your involvement in that area. So we think for the most part, people doing that are going to have the coverage you need. And then anytime there is alcohol involved, if there is a situation where you are securing the permit for that alcohol, or you are in a position where you are actually profiting from the sale of the alcohol directly, that's something where you want to give us a call, because we want to talk through it with you and see if you would be best served by purchasing a liquor liability policy, or whether you have sufficient coverage through the program as it's currently written. So that concludes the general liability overview. Switching gears now to talk about the other part of the program that is automatically provided when you enroll. It is called participant accident coverage. It's referred to in many ways in our industry. You might hear it called excess medical coverage, excess accident medical coverage, basic accident coverage. But basically what it is coverage for medical bills for accidental injuries that occur, and it's regardless of fault. Whereas when we're talking about that general liability, it comes into play when someone gets hurt and they say, you caused it, your negligence caused it, we want you to pay for it, we're suing you. This coverage is not like that. This is, I got hurt, it was on a covered event, and I have these medical bills, and you turn them in, and assuming all these other things we're going to talk about next fall into place, then this coverage applies. It is excess, meaning it applies after your primary health insurance coverage. So it's not a replacement. Well, it can be a replacement for that if you don't have it, but it's not really intended to be. It's supposed to supplement what you already have. There's also an accidental death and dismemberment benefit that applies. In terms of the claims relative to this coverage, the injuries that we pay claims for range anywhere from wrist injuries to neck fractures. Unfortunately, I have to say neck fractures in the plural because there have been more than one circumstance where that has occurred. The broad range of injuries, what they are, the type of injuries you would expect, and you're all probably familiar with, possibly having your own experience at one point in time. About 90% of the claimants on average do have other insurance, so the Leagues program is in a position to be paying the parts of those claims that aren't paid by their primary insurance. So your deductible under your primary health insurance and your copays, which really can add up to be quite a bit. So this is a big benefit, and I know one that is sometimes a selling point for you in terms of convincing people why they would be best served by becoming a member and not just showing up at your rides on a regular basis. We have seen a trend over the past several years of the participant accident cost increasing. I know we talked quite a bit about that last year, and it is continuing, or has continued through 2013, where we're seeing more claims, and also the cost of the claims is increasing. And some of the reasons that we attributed that to, for one thing, when you guys are doing your job, which you are, there's more people out there riding, and they're riding more often. So obviously that creates a greater opportunity for injuries. Also, I think we've done a good job of creating greater awareness, and I think you have all probably done a good job in your clubs of letting people know about the availability of this benefit. And therefore, again, we may be getting more claims reported, whereas in the past maybe people didn't know to report a claim. Medical inflation is definitely a factor that can contribute to these costs going up, and also the trend toward large deductibles in health insurance plans that people are buying these days shifts more cost to the League policy. So where in the past, say if I had a $500 deductible and I had an injury and the League program paid my $500 deductible, well, if I increased that and went to a large deductible plan with a $3,000 deductible, then for the same injury, the League program may be paying $3,000 instead of $500. So all of that really can come together, and I think is causing some of the trend we're seeing. We actually have seen the average loss per club more than double since 2008. So that trend is continuing. We look at it every year. We talk to the league. We see is there something we could be doing differently, but I think it's really just a factor of a lot of different environmental considerations that are coming into play that are causing those to go up. The coverage in terms of when it applies is similar, and who it covers is similar to the general liability. There's a few differences in that this is really geared toward when you are riding your bicycle, so it doesn't really come into play at a club meeting, for example. But it does cover members of your club and first-time invited guests during their club rides, your regular rides, and also during time trials that are conducted and supervised by the club. For advocacy organizations, obviously, it's only going to come into play if you indicate at the beginning of the enrollment process that you have these rights. Because if you say you don't, then you will pay a lower premium, which is for general liability only, which is good, but you won't have coverage for your members, general liability or participant accident if you say that you don't do club rides when you actually do. So again, if you think one way at the beginning of the year and it changes, then you just need to give us a call and we'll get that corrected. It also covers all of the registered participants and volunteers at your special events, again, those being where a fee is charged and that you need to report those to us by name and pay for separately. And then it also covers attendees of bicycle education courses that are organized by an insured club that, when you enroll, indicate that you have bicycle education courses that include an on-bicycle component. And now might be a good time to just give you a little briefing on the bicycle education. When you go through the enrollment process, it's going to ask you if you do have bicycle education courses, but it's going to give you a definition of what that means, and you need to pay close attention to it because it says that those are bicycle safety courses where you actually have people enroll and sign up by name. And so if you don't have people enroll and sign up by name, but you do provide some type of education services, you don't have to pay the separate premium. So you can say that you don't have those courses that meet that definition. Another thing to point out here is that if you are a bicycle club and you do bicycle education courses where you have people sign up by name, but it's only exclusively 100% for your members, you can also answer that you don't have those, and you'll still have coverage for your club member only, even though you won't have to pay the separate premium that applies. And those are written out in more detail. You'll see them when you are going through the enrollment process, so you can read through it and make sure you feel comfortable with how you're answering it, or give us a call if there's any confusion. The participant accident limit, there's two limits that apply. One is the accident medical, so that's for the medical bills that I talked about associated with an injury. It's excess of a $500 disappearing deductible. By disappearing, that means that it can be met by payments from your primary insurance. So if you have an injury and you show us that your primary insurance paid, say, $1,000 for the claim, but that there was still $1,500 left over of unpaid bills, then the $1,000 that they paid will meet the league's deductible. So you'll, in essence, get the $1,500 out of pocket and end up, in the end, for the most part, not paying anything. So that's why this provides an important benefit to your members. And if the person does not have other invalid and collectible insurance, then the $500 deductible is going to come into play because it won't be met by any other insurance. And after that deductible, the person's bills will be paid up to the $10,000 limit. There's also an accidental death and dismemberment benefit. So in the unfortunate situation where there were to be a fatality, there is a $5,000 benefit that is automatically paid, assuming you report the claim, to the family of the individual. So in terms of how you purchase this, kind of the basic coverage that we talked about, you would purchase coverage online. We've tried really hard to make it a very easy yes, no with pop-ups of kind of alerts. If you say, yes, we do racing, you're going to get an alert that says, well, you can still buy this coverage, but just know that the races aren't covered. So hopefully at the end, once you've filled everything out, you get a summary of all that. So it should give you a nice tool if you need to take it back and discuss it with other members within your organization. If you don't want to actually execute and purchase the coverage, you can go through the whole process, get that printout, and then you can wait, and you'll have a confirmation number so you can go back in and buy it later without having to answer everything all over again the second time, or even go back in and change answers if maybe once you discuss it, you think you should have answered something differently. The special events are also something that you register online, and you can request your certificates of insurance for those special events online so that you can just get them real time whenever you request them. And if you are for some reason not able to use the online system, you can always call us, and we're basically going to get on the system and enroll you, but we'll ask you the questions over the phone. For the most part, people haven't taken advantage of that and are able, today's world, to get to a computer and be able to sign up. The premium for coverage other than the special event coverage is all paid for at the time of enrollment, and the special event premium is based on your number of participants, and that's why it's paid for after the event, because what we learned over the years is that you often don't know how many people are going to be participating at your special event. And so we were able to make it so that you can go in after the fact and just tell us how many were actually there. An important note is that for bicycle clubs, when you are enrolling a special event, you don't need to count in the participation figure the bicycle club members that went to the special event. And the idea there is that you already paid for them when you signed up at the beginning of the year, because you paid based on your whole membership. And so you don't have to pay again when those same members come and participate in a special event. Coverage starts at the time that you finish the enrollment process and you make your payment. And that can be after February. If you sign up before February 1st, that's fine, but your coverage will just start on February 1st. If you sign up after February 1st, then your coverage will start whatever day you enroll and pay, and it will end on February 1st, 2015. It's not prorated, so to get the most benefit out of your coverage, especially if you are doing any riding earlier in the year, I guess that depends on the climate you're in, but you want to sign up by February 1st in order to get the full advantage of the coverage. There are some discounts that apply, but they don't start kicking in unless you sign up after August. So this is the slide everybody always is most interested in, and you probably wish I would have just said this first. But the rates for this year for bicycle clubs are, I won't read them to you, but they're shown here on the screen. Just so you have a sense of how that compares, that is from a minimum premium standpoint, which about 25% of the clubs in the program are at the minimum premium level. It's a 5% increase from last year. The rates themselves are closer to a 15 to 16% increase. And the reason for the rate increase this year, again, is driven by the costs of the participant accident claims that have been steadily going up. And also on the general liability side, we have had some activity where the losses are running a little higher than what the insurance company has as a target, and also just the general conditions in the general liability market are such that we're not seeing, in some periods of time we see those rate decreases year after year, which we, hope maybe in the least future, in the next few years, depending on what happens in the marketplace. But those are the dynamics that are really coming into play with having a rate increase this year. We try to keep it as low as we possibly could. We looked at other participant accident insurance companies who wanted much, much higher rates, so we decided to stick with a carrier that's been standing by your side, Mutual of Omaha, through many years, including the years when the losses have well exceeded the premiums that they collected. So from an advocacy organization standpoint, the rate for the flat fee for the advocacy organizations that don't have the regular rides is $75, and that's for the general liability only. and it is $140 for those that do conduct the 12 or fewer club rides a year with 50 or fewer participants on average in those rides. Some of the other costs that will come into play as you go through the enrollment system: if you rent, lease, or own your office year-round, there's a $55 charge. That does not apply to very many organizations currently. If you organize bicycle education courses, this is the item I talked about earlier, where when you go through the enrollment process, really read this note that says important. It's up at the top of the page, so that if you don't need to pay this, you won't. But if you do, you're able to pay just a flat fee, and it covers all of the education activities that fall within the definition. So you're not having to report class by class or number of people or anything like that. It's just a flat fee. And you do get an important discount if you utilize LCIs only as your instructors, because we, as an insurance organization, believe in that LCI program, that if the instructors have that extra training and we have the assurance that they've gone through the leaks protocols, that it makes sense that we can charge them a lower rate. So you can see the differential here. If it's classroom only, then there's general liability only applying, because there's no need for participant accident if people aren't actually on bikes. But if you do have some that include on-bike instruction, then you pay that separate flat rate. And then the bicycle refurbishment coverage, which about 30 clubs have historically purchased each year, you can buy that for $66. And again, if you have a program where you're fixing up bikes and giving them away, then that provides you coverage relative to that specific activity. Okay, so next element of the program cost, we talked about special events and how those are the events where you are charging the participants to participate in the event. So those have a little different rates from the regular club rates, which you can see here on your screen. The rate increases are really consistent with what we just talked about for the club rates. They are at a 5% increase in terms of the minimum premium, so relatively slight, and then around 15 to 16% for the different per participant categories that you see there. There's also an optional participant accident coverage which you can buy, and when you would buy that is if you have an event where you have many non-members that you know are coming to the event, but you aren't charging a fee. So you don't need to enroll it as a special event and pay the premiums that apply for that. But you may want to make sure that the participant accident coverage applies to the people who are coming and participating in that ride. So those rates are a participant accident only rate, and you can call us to sign up to get that coverage for an event if you are interested in that. We had about 20 clubs participate in that the first couple of years, but only about 3 last year, so there wasn't as much interest, but it's available to you in the event you would like to pursue it. Moving on to non-owned hired auto liability coverage. This is coverage that applies for vehicle-related losses. So everything we talked about when I talked about general liability does not apply if the cause of the loss is somebody driving a car on behalf of your club. So if you have individuals who are, riding the course to make sure everything is in good condition, or they're just there to, in the event somebody is injured, and so those individuals are driving on behalf of the club, this is when you would be interested in buying this coverage. And it usually costs about $250 for the clubs that have purchased it. There are about 15 who have purchased it to date. And it doesn't apply, as I mentioned before, if you own a car. That's something you would need to work with a local agent on. It covers the club itself, and it covers the individual who is using with permission an auto the club has hired or borrowed. So if you rent a car, it covers the driver of that car. Something important here and commonly misunderstood is that it doesn't cover an individual driving his or her own car. That person driving his or her own car, their insurance would apply to cover their own interests. Now the club could still be, or would still be covered, and that's why the club would want to buy the coverage, but it doesn't replace an individual's own insurance, which often they think, well, you asked me to drive, so you should pay for it, but that's not how it works. Their own auto insurance would be who would defend and come into play if they have an accident. Next coverage, directors and officers liability coverage. About 140 of the clubs in the programs, about a quarter of the programs, are currently purchasing the directors and officers liability coverage. This, again, a common misconception is that, well, the club's directors and officers won't have any coverage if we don't buy this. And that isn't actually correct. They are covered under the general liability policy. So if somebody is injured and as a result they sue the directors and officers of the club by name because they say you should have had better policies and procedures to know what route we were on and whether it was safe, those individuals would be covered under the general liability. This coverage does not need to be purchased in order for those claims to be covered. But this is a coverage that applies to more business decisions and acts of the board of directors. It also covers employment practices. So for those of you who have employees, it's probably even more important than it is for clubs who don't, because if you have a failure to promote, failure to hire, a harassment type of a lawsuit, that employment practices limit will come into play in that situation. It covers the insured club, its board of directors, and its volunteers. And there's an option for a $1 million or a $2 million option when you go in and purchase it. You go to the same website that you go to buy the general liability and participant accident coverage we've been talking about, but you have to click a separate button. I know we've been asked why isn't it all just part of the same process. It's because it's delivered through a group purchasing program that we're able to make available to a large number of amateur sports organizations that have revenues under $1 million each year. And so by having it part of this broad program, we're able to keep the rates down, or the premiums, to those you see here, $550 plus a $25 fee for the $1 million limit, and $850 plus a $25 fee for the $2 million limit, which if any of you have ever gone out and tried to secure the coverage independently, I would think most likely you found it to be more expensive than what we're able to offer through this program. And you do still have your own separate rates. You're not subject to your rate being deteriorated by another organization's losses. The coverage begins the day following purchase through February 1st, 2015. And in this case, which is different from what we talked about with the league's other general liability and participant accident, this actually is prorated. So if you go in July and buy it, it will be prorated and it will apply all the way through February 1st. And then we'll send you a renewal notice to remind you it's time to renew at that time. The LCIs automatically have coverage through the league's insurance programs. They don't need to go in and sign up or enroll or do anything special. Just by virtue of having that designation and having gone through the appropriate training, you're automatically afforded general liability coverage that applies during your smart cycling seminars and classes, as long as you're conducting it in accordance with what you've learned from the league. And many times you may be asked to provide proof of insurance if you're having your class at a certain facility. And so you can go online to the same website where the insurance purchase information is and get your form that you need to complete and go ahead and turn that back into us and we'll get you your certificate. One thing we are working on that's not there yet is that we want those forms to be fillable electronically. Right now you have to print it, fill it out, and email or fax it back, but we're trying to, or we are going to switch that over so you can actually fill that in. I know I personally get frustrated when I go and I try to click and it doesn't do anything, and unfortunately that form right now is in that boat, but we're going to be working on upgrading that for you. In terms of who you should call with questions, you can always certainly call me. My information is here. the primary contact person, as I mentioned earlier, will be Chris Whitted. Chris works directly with Renee, so they kind of have a team approach over there. And if Chris is out for some reason, Renee is here. And so Chris's information is found here for your benefit, her direct line, and also her email. And then we also have a toll-free number where you can just call and you ask our receptionist to talk to myself or Chris. And that is what we have for you. And it's so quiet, I'm hoping that I haven't been talking to myself for a really long time.
No, Marla, I certainly heard all that, and from the volume of questions we have, people have definitely been listening. We will try to get to as many of these questions as we can and answer them as best as we can. The format that we have, where it's kind of one way, you type the question and I answer them, doesn't always lead to full understanding. And so if you don't get all the answer you need, you can call me, Scott Williams, at the League, or these contacts here. I will say that American Specialty has always been just super helpful, great at listening to your concerns and your questions and trying to talk through things in a way that makes sense so that you understand and you know that they understand. And if you have any doubts about your level of insurance, then they can be taken care of. So don't be afraid to call if you have any sort of nagging worry or a question or some scenario that you're just not clear on. So, speaking of scenarios that people aren't quite clear on, I will try to batch these as best as I can where we have had similar questions. First of all, I had a question about minors, those under 18 participating in club activities. Are there any specific requirements around the insurance, and how should clubs handle those most responsibly?
There are not any age-specific requirements relative to how the coverage applies. The coverage, since this is not, we don't consider the League obviously a youth sports organization, the coverage doesn't apply for abuse and molestation type claims, with the idea being that for the most part the clubs aren't setting up opportunities for kids to be dropped off and your club is supervising them or in that type of position, where usually it's more family oriented with their guardians or parents actually with them. But I think the one recommendation we would make is that if you do have any programs where you're doing something more along the lines of supervising minors, that we would highly recommend that you run background checks, which there's many different resources out there to do that affordably, and we would recommend that as an important protocol if that is something your club does.
Okay, the next question is about the big, mushy term conducted and supervised. A couple of people asked and gave some specific questions around what does it mean for conducted and supervised. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Generally, the best way to think about that, if you're a club and you are putting your calendar of events out there, is that it is an official club activity. So say that 5 of your members just got together, it wasn't a scheduled ride, you didn't advertise it anywhere, you didn't tell anybody about it, but then they said, whoa, we thought it was an official ride. I would say, you know, that is going to fall outside of the scope of coverage. But if it's something that you've scheduled, you've promoted, you potentially have a ride leader appointed, you have a designated meeting place that you've told people about, we're going to come to you in the event of the claim. And when I say you, I mean somebody who is identified as an official representative of the club, and you are going to represent to us that this was one of your rides. And generally, that is how far it goes. Again, I'm not trying to open us up or say that we're not checking into it, but at the end of the day, we do have to largely rely on you as a club to represent what your official club activities were. And so you'll be signing off on the form, and we will be relying on that information from you. We have not had a claim, general liability, or participant accident that I'm aware of that was denied on the basis of it wasn't being a club activity, because you're reporting them to us as club activities.
And I think that if you just sort of apply the filter of, is this something that I would be willing to sort of have the club take responsibility for? If these people are going out riding, would you want someone to come back to you and say, hey, I saw some people, doing such and so, riding responsibly or irresponsibly. Were those your club members? And the question certainly extends beyond insurance. If they did something that someone considered negligent, and, a lawsuit is more than just the payment that American Specialty has to pay out. It's your time going to court and being deposed, and it would be a real headache for you as well. So I think those are the kinds of questions that it makes sense to ask in terms of what you as a club are considering your club activities. Does that sound like a reasonable way of looking at it, Renee?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that's applicable, yeah.
I don't know why I called on you out of nowhere. When I think American Specialty, I think Renee. I'm glad you were ready. You weren't asleep at the switch there.
He's awake now, but I heard a lot of sighing in the background while I was talking.
Okay, one thing, people are asking about coverage for trail cleanup and trail maintenance.
That
Either
is
of you.
provided. So we have some wording when you go through the enrollment process that will provide a little clarification on that. But generally we say that it does provide trail maintenance, trail cleanup, that type of thing, if it's an organized club activity, because we believe it's bicycle related, if it has to do with a bicycle trail. If you are actually designing or providing any type of engineering services or being hired to do that, that falls outside the scope of the program. The other area that we have not considered to be a bicycle-related activity that comes up from time to time is an Adopt a Highway program, where you are cleaning up a highway or a section of a highway. If it was a section of a bicycle trail, then that would be a different story. But when it is just cleaning up trash off of the side of the highway, we have not felt that that is considered a bicycle-related activity and covered under the program.
Great. Next topic, waivers. How long should they be retained?
That is something that I would direct you back to local legal counsel if you have somebody on your board or someone you can access who can give you some advice, because the statute of limitation varies by state, and you want to keep them for at least the statute of limitations in your state. And then the other complicating factor that can come into play is with minors, the statute of limitation for the most part doesn't start running until they reach the age of majority. So in the case of minors, you would potentially want to be retaining them for a lot longer. The other dynamic, though, with minors is that the benefits of the waiver are not as strong as they are with adults, because in most jurisdictions, the minors' rights can't be waived on their behalf. Now, there are some that have had more favorable law come into play, but we still use them as a defense tool. So if you have them, we're still able to use that to say, well, this family and this individual did know that they could get hurt, but it's with a minor unlikely that we could get the whole case thrown out on the basis of it. But again, I would want you to talk to your local legal counsel to find out about how the statute of limitations works in your state.
Thank you. Next topic, special events. When you're paying for the number of participants in a special event, if you have non-member volunteers, I believe those people, in order to be covered by the insurance, need to be paid a premium for. Is that correct?
We just actually ask for participant numbers, and generally meaning the number of riders.
Okay.
So I would say that they can just count the number of their registrants, and the volunteers are more of a throw-in, I guess, for lack of a better term. But if the volunteers are riding, they should be counted. But if they're standing at a table passing out water, you wouldn't need to count them, because the coverage for the participant accident really applies to people relative to injuries from riding.
Great. And if somebody has a multi-day special event, is that insured as one special event?
Yes. And you report the event dates, and then the coverage also applies for setup and tear down the day before and after your event.
Okay, changing topics then, and on to the coverage and the limitation of non-members riding once with the club and being covered by the insurance. If they ride again, I mean, I think we've discussed this before, most of these rides are on public roads or public trails, and you can't keep someone from riding there. But what are the implications for the insurance?
Well, if it's a person who's back for their fourth tag along and they don't want to become a member, and they get hurt, they would not have general liability coverage. Or if they hurt somebody and they get sued, they won't have any coverage through this program. Or if they themselves are injured, they would not have the participant accident coverage. Now, if they bring a lawsuit against your club would be covered. We would have some pretty strong defenses, because we would say, well, what obligation or duty did we owe to this person who was tagging along and not really part of our ride officially? So we might have some extra defenses in that case, but it does not impair your general liability coverage that those individuals are there. And as we've spent more time and had opportunities to even come to in-person club meetings and conferences and that type of thing, we understand that the world is not one where it's just, here's my club, it has 100 people, and we're the only people that ever go on our regular ride. So we understand that, and so your coverage won't be impaired as a result of that.
Great. A couple of questions about the facilities add-on. If someone is running a storage unit where they keep an equipment or trailer, that sort of thing, should they then pay the fee for rental property?
No, that question, and I think the way it's worded on the enrollment will provide more direction, but it says, do you utilize year-round office space?
So so in terms of someplace that someone actually goes and works on a regular basis, is that?
Right. Yeah, the concern or the reason for the separate charge is that it's a place of business where people are coming and they could slip or fall and that type of thing. But a storage unit that is every once in a while accessed by somebody is not the same. But the only point where I might caution you is to know that there's no coverage for the contents of it, because that's contents that's in the club's custody and control. So you would want to make sure that you're either buying coverage for that, or maybe it's something that other people own, and you'd want to make sure they know that you aren't paying for it if something happens to the storage unit.
Okay. Directors and officers is our next topic. Does this include bonding for financial mismanagement, for instance, theft of club funds?
Yeah, well, it's not the same as bonding. And so if somebody had a specific requirement where somebody needed to be bonded in order to meet a requirement or an application or something that the club is working, or the advocacy organization, they might want to call us separately. That term always gives me pause, because usually it comes from somebody requiring something of the club, and we aren't providing crime coverage. And so it's not the same as anyone being bonded where we've put them through to see if they are somebody who doesn't have a background of theft, that type of thing.
Okay. Let's see. Someone asked about the limit on sports equipment. Is it a per event, or per theft basis, if 5 bikes are stolen from a bike corral, is it $5,000 total or $5,000 per bike as a limit?
That is actually a total.
So
And
keep
the
an eye.
deductible applies per claim. So I guess in that case, if 3 bikes were stolen at the same time from the same place, that would be one claim. So the deductible would apply once, but the limit would also apply to all of them collectively.
So keep a close eye on the really expensive bikes.
Yes.
Always a good idea.
Yes. And again, if that, we haven't had any, I mean, we've had very limited activity. We have had a few claims. We've had a custom bike stolen, but the limit has never been an issue. But if at some point we thought it needs to be increased, we could always look at an option for that to consider.
Let's see. I'm looking through what has come in while we've been talking. We did have some questions again about the liquor liability coverage. If they give away beer at a post-ride party, does that require any additional coverage if they're not selling it?
Renee says anytime you're serving alcohol that you should just call us because we kind of have a little checklist we'll walk through with you, and then we can give you, because there's several different scenarios that apply. I mean, my rule of thumb is that if you aren't profiting from the sale of it, then you probably don't need the separate coverage, but the specific policy wording says that there's no coverage for an entity that's in the business of furnishing, distributing, or selling alcohol. And so it doesn't give us really an ironclad type of a definition. So we're just trying to figure out if what you're doing could put you in that category. Then we'll recommend you secure a separate liquor liability coverage, which isn't very expensive. But it's just best if you can walk through that. I mean, the clear situation where I think if it's after the event, you know, there's no money changing hands, there's no permits, there's nothing like that, but people can grab a beer or they can grab a drink afterward, then you probably don't need to call. That's the easy one. But when you get into like, well, there's a ticket, you get 2 drinks for your ticket, or something like that.
Get a liquor license, then
Right. Sometimes we find that like a bar or somebody's going to help you out. They're going to provide servers. They're going to do this and that. But then they say, well, you're a nonprofit, so you get the permit because it's going to be hard for us to do. And that sort of changes the whole dynamic.
Okay. Give me just a second here. I'll just let you know the thing I was typing and sending to everybody, but maybe you didn't see it. People are asking for copies of the presentation. It will be posted along with the recording of the presentation. You'll be able to get that. I will try to have the recording posted tonight or tomorrow and the presentation along with it. Another question on the D&O, a couple of clarifications about the D&O directors and officers. So are directors and officers covered for defense against accusations of sexual harassment? It's not clear in the question whether this is about the general liability or the directors and officers, so just maybe clarify how those 2 policies cover accusations of sexual harassment.
The general liability policy generally wouldn't cover that type of an allegation because it's not usually considered a bodily injury. Harassment is not the same as an assault, for example. And if it's an assault, there's a whole other problem where that's an intentional act. So the general liability is probably not going to come into play. And so it is more likely that it would apply under the directors and officers liability policy. And specifically under the employment practices section. But that is one where I might want to know a little bit more about the circumstances before providing kind of a blanket answer, because it reminds me of that it might be coming from an actual situation or scenario. Maybe something's happened or somebody's accused somebody within the club, and so I would rather talk about that more specifically instead of hypothetically.
Okay, that sounds sensible. And just to be clear, in terms of a previous answer about the directors and officers insurance, what is the coverage? How does the coverage for loss of club funds by theft from a director or officer? How is that handled?
That would not be covered under the directors and officers liability policy. So if you had a situation of employee theft, that would usually be covered under a crime policy, or in the case of a small business, a lot of times they have business owners liability policies that kind of package together a lot of the things you need as a small business. And so the property often has a feature to provide coverage for theft from employees, theft from volunteers, or even just burglary or robbery from an outside party, like if somebody's transporting money outside the organization, so you've got a lot of cash from a special event, you're going to the bank and you get robbed. Those type of things are going to be covered more under a property crime policy. So that's one of those where we're recommending you work with a local agent who can better understand your specifics, because that's very highly specific to an individual club circumstances, and that's why under a national program like this, we're not really able to just provide a blanket benefit.
Okay. I think a lot of the questions that we have remaining are pretty specific, and it will make more sense for us to try to follow up one-on-one to get those answers out to people. And if you don't hear from us, if you still have the questions and you haven't heard from us in a couple of days by the end of the week, for instance, please either email me or email Chris or Marla and follow up that way. They're certainly not unanswerable questions, but I think a lot of them, like I said, are pretty specific and not necessarily general information, although they may apply to more than one person. But you know, this does not end the discussion, because always you can call American Specialty, or you can call me, Scott Williams, Membership Director at the League of American Bicyclists, and I can help you towards an answer or refer you to Chris or Marla or Renee to get that answer. Marla, thank you very much for all the work that you have done for us, for the presentation, for how well you treat our members. Thank you, everybody out there running a club and caring so much about your participants and riders and taking care of them through the insurance program and everything that you do for them. Like I said, we will try to follow up on some of the specific questions later in the week and make sure you know everything you need to know. I think one big question, though, I don't think you actually said this, when can they sign up on the website?
They will be able to sign up by tomorrow afternoon.
By tomorrow afternoon. And there are links from the League site. The direct link, is it there? amerspec.com/LAB is the direct link. If you got the reminder about the webinar today, the link is in there, and we're looking for a launch tomorrow afternoon. Got a lot of comments. Thank you for the help tonight to add to my thanks. So everybody have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.